Heads up, everyone. I just opened the doors to my brand new signature course called Humanize to Monetize. You can head to amyjomartin.com/H2M. That's H number 2M. This is my class all about personal branding, how to create connections that convert.
Without passion, it's very hard to be successful, and it's almost impossible to be happy.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step.
Just let go.
Jeff Sutherland is on the show today, and he is an efficiency and productivity legend. He's all about teaching the art of doing twice the work in half the time. So Jeff has created something called Scrum, which is a process, a framework that some of the biggest companies in the world use. And this has been around for decades. He is the voice of authority when it comes to productivity and efficiency and just making things work better, faster, smoother. In this episode, Jeff shares the specifics about his system and what you need to do in order to adopt these proven methods. And this information can be applied to any size team or just even as an individual if you don't have a team that you're working with, if you're working solo, or if you're working in a big corporate company. Same, you can apply this information. So it's very applicable across the board, regardless of your situation. Jeff and I also discuss how his methodology can be applied to families and even kids. If you find yourself in situations on a frequent basis where you are late, you're running late, or your projects are late, then this is going to be so helpful for you. I promise. That's actually how Jeff got started. He was hired because there was a company that was constantly running behind and running late on their projects. I've been applying some of Jeff's methodology now for several years, and I didn't even realize he is like the founder of this stuff. So it's such a treat to have him. Without further ado, here's Jeff Sutherland. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. For me, being able to design my own day is a non-negotiable. As many of you know, I'm a bit of a time management nerd. So when I find something that allows me to be more efficient and more effective, I want to share it with everyone. So here's the scoop. I have a new tool in my productivity tool belt, and I'm a bit obsessed. It's Monday.com. My team and I have never felt more organized, and I have a new sense of perceived control. My to-do list is no longer the boss of me. I feel more in control because every project, initiative, date, and task is captured and organized in one place. And my team is in the loop and involved every step of the way. To get a free trial, head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. That's hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. With Monday.com, it's like I have a brand new operating system. There's no long list, and everything has its own home, its own deadline, its own team member that's assigned and associated, and it's color coordinated. We all have multifaceted jobs and businesses. There are many components to my business, and each and every one of them has its own compartment. Each division is always one click away. For example, my team and I have a dedicated board for this very podcast. Did you know there are 28 steps involved in getting one podcast to air? It's the same exact process every time. And it's a system. We have the various key steps mapped out as micro tasks. And this allows for my team and I to stay in lockstep every step of the way. With Monday.com, I can zoom out and see the big picture, a roadmap view from 30,000 feet. And a moment later, I can zoom in and focus on a specific micro task within a project, within a division of the company. I could go on and on about the features that Monday.com offers, one of which is I've built my social media content calendar inside of Monday.com. I finally have one that I actually use, that I like, and it's embedded into my overall Google Calendar. Another feature that I love is the Google Doc integration. You know I love a good spreadsheet. I can pull them into Monday.com and edit them right there versus having 97 tabs open on my computer. If how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, then I can't think of anything more important than using the time in our days wisely. To grab your free trial, head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. That's hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. Just check it out. It's free. It's worth it. And let me know on social media if it's working out for you and how it's going. Just shoot me a DM and we can swap tips and tricks. And I did link to that free trial URL just in case you missed it. So take a look in the show notes if you want to click through directly. Jeff, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. And in the spirit of why not now, let's just hop in. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you asked yourself, why not now?
Well, probably the most important decision I've ever made is I spent 11 years as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, flew 100 missions over North Vietnam, and my last tour was at the Air Force Academy as a professor. Then I had the opportunity, I was working on a doctoral degree at the nearest medical school. I had an opportunity to leave the Air Force and become a grant researcher and PhD candidate at the medical school. I spent 11 years there doing grant research funded by the National Cancer Institute, really supercomputer research. So I had a team that had a lot of technical expertise. And a large banking company came by one day and they said, we're running 150 banks all over North America. And you guys have all the expertise on key technologies we're using. And over at the bank, we don't know what we're doing, but we have all the money. So how about you come to work for the bank? And they made me an offer that my wife couldn't refuse.
She couldn't refuse, huh?
So that was a little bit of a why not now moment. Then I get into the bank though, and I'm essentially the chief technology officer for these 150 banks. But as I'm looking at the future of the technology, I'm looking at the projects in the banks, and the projects are all late. So I went down on the floor. I said, okay, hundreds of people working on these projects. They have these Gantt charts on the wall with hundreds of tasks, and every task has a name and a date against it. And so being a mathematician and probability expert, I calculate what's the probability of a project being late using this Gantt chart thing.
Okay.
And the probability is 100%, okay? Because if you have 1,000 tasks and there's some of them that if those tasks are late, they're going to make the whole project late. There's always enough of them to make it guaranteed to be late. So I look at that, that's the biggest problem the bank has. So this, at the time I was reading a book called In Search of Excellence. It was a book about the best companies in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, they have a chapter on doing a startup inside a big company. And they describe the model, and the actual principles in that chapter are really almost identical to the Agile principles in the Agile Manifesto, which is the big buzzword today, business agility, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I take that book, I go into the CEO's office, and I said, have you noticed all your projects are late? And he said, yeah. He says, every morning, at least 4 or 5 CIOs of the banks call me up, and he says, they scream at me. And I said, well, it's not getting any better, because when they're late, the managers have more meetings, they have more reports, and it makes it even worse.
Yes.
So he says to me,
okay.
well, what should we do? Well, that was my why not now moment. Why don't we completely change the way a bank does business? So I said to him, here's the book I'm reading. Here's the chapter on creating a startup within a big company. We should do that. And to do it, let's take the worst business unit in the company, because we can't fix everything at once. Let's take the one that's bleeding red ink, losing the most money, and I'll show you how to fix it. And the way we're going to fix it is we're going to break everyone involved in the process, in the technology, in the sales and marketing. We're going to put them all on one big team broken down into small teams, 4 or 5 people. We're going to have product management come in at the beginning of the week, prioritize everything by business value. And at the end of the week on Friday, everything that they decided on the beginning of the week will be deployed to 150 banks.
What happened?
And he says to me, well, that's going to be a big headache, Jeff. It's not going to be fun like working on technology stuff. I said, I don't care. The bank needs to be fixed. So that is launched. That occurred in 1983, and that has launched what drives the most successful companies in the world today. If you look at the most valuable companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, they all use Scrum as a primary mechanism to deliver their products, okay?
And let's talk about this for a moment. So I love hearing the genesis, because I even like looking back, you had a paper titled The New Product Development Game in 1986, right? And how there's nothing more relevant at the moment with agility. And I mean, you look at the word even pivot in business, not knowing what to do in 2020. But so Scrum, and I was like, okay, this is at first an acronym, right? And no, and I learned about the term, and it's actually a rugby reference, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Okay, which is just helpful, I think. Can you talk through the basics for people who maybe they're not familiar, but we're all familiar with that situation of things constantly being late, of having that pressure. Like we all have that in common. So explain a little bit more about kind of the basics of Scrum, if you could.
So one of the things we learned I learned before the bank, I was working with Bell Labs using their technologies, and learned that small teams are really important. The best team size is 4 or 5 people. I've heard Elon Musk refuses to go to meetings that have more than 4 or 5 people.
Really?
That's one of the reasons he's most successful, because that's where you get the creativity, you get the decision making. So I knew from the very beginning it needed to be small teams. The business unit in the bank very quickly became the most profitable segment of the bank because of this new way of working. And so I was pulled into company after company to solve these kind of problems. And then in 1993, I was at a company where we were building a product that needed people to work in the right way to be most successful with the product. And so I wanted them to work in the way that I've been working out, starting with a bank, but moving through, I was chief technology officer of many companies. So we needed to formalize that so that other companies could use our product and build their applications using what became Scrum. So I said to the team, I've worked on many technology developments over the last 10 years or so. And every time we've had to study all the research in the literature in order to move beyond it. And that means we're going to have to study at least 1,000 papers. We're going to do it as a team. We're going to start reading while we're working. We're going to be reading productivity, teamwork, what makes things work really well, what makes things go really fast, what makes the quality go really high. And on about the 300th paper, we came to the paper that you mentioned, the new product development game. And it was a big surprise because we were reading mostly computer research papers. And this paper was in the Harvard Business Review. This was a business paper. And it was written by two Japanese professors, Professor Takeuchi Nanaka, who have since become our mentors. And they were describing the best teams they saw all over the world, mainly in lean manufacturing companies like Honda, Canon, 3M in the United States. They spent 6 years writing a book on Toyota. And they said these teams all have the same qualities. Number one, they have really transcendent goals, big goal. Okay, so like the Prius team, before they had a Prius, the goal was to green the planet. Okay, so we need a car that gets twice the gas mileage, and we need to deliver it in half the time we've ever delivered a new car. That was the goal. In achieving that goal, the team you need to let the team go. They need autonomy as a team to figure it out, to make their own decisions. So the management acts kind of like investors, okay? As a venture capital investor, we don't micromanage the company. You know, we give them some guidance, we agree on a big goal, and then we let them go to work and make their own decisions. In order for the team to be effective, it needs to be a cross-functional team. They need to be learning together how to do what needs to be done, okay? So those were the three primary things they saw in every one of these teams. And they described how the management set up the teams. And on the teams, they had people learning each other's jobs, okay? Helping each other out. And they had a facilitative team leader, which today in Scrum we call the Scrum Master, that helps the team get their work done, is not a manager telling them what to do, but is more like a coach that is coaching the team.
When you talk about, let's just take the Prius, for example, are these multiple mini teams of 4 and 5 under this bigger initiative? And then it sounds like management or the stakeholders, executives, they're almost like you said, the investors. So it's the mentality is shifting into that more entrepreneurship mindset, I would say, to where you've got these mini intrapreneurs, these teams. It makes so much sense. So I actually have adopted some of this in some of my training programs for women leaders and entrepreneurs, and we call them 2-week mini sprints. And it's totally borrowed from your entire philosophy. And what I love about this is it makes us feel like this is an experiment, and it's hyper focused. And when we kind of have an experiment per se, I'm using air quotes here for those listening, I think of it as like beta when we put things in petri dishes coming from the corporate world. When you would say beta on anything, it was like, oh, okay, a little bit more room for innovation there. Let's leave them alone. It's in beta. Is that kind of part of the mindset that you're okay? And the 2-week, tell me about that.
Okay, so part of it in Takeuchi Naka's paper, looking at people building like new cars at Toyota, they're going to build a production prototype really quickly.
Okay.
And then they're going to continuously iterate on that, making it better. So that's fundamental. So in Scrum, that iteration is always less than a month. Today, we like 1 week is actually the shorter the iteration, the faster you learn.
And question for you on that then, Jeff. So when these iterations and prototypes, do you have a philosophy on whether or not and when they should become forward-facing for the feedback loop externally, or are they always internal?
Well, we have a person in Scrum we call the product owner, who is responsible for the vision and the backlog that the team is going to implement, and works with the team to create a goal for that iteration, for that sprint. And that goal needs to be, we call it a potentially shippable increment of product. It's something that actually works, that a user could actually use, and the product owner decides whether to actually give it to users. Now, in the very first sprint, the very first Scrum team, we gave the prototype of the product to the consultants in our company to actually go out and use on projects. So that's the best way to do it. On the very first sprint, you give it to a beta user and they try it out, right?
I love it. Okay, cool. This reminds me. So I've been fortunate to have Tony Shea, the CEO of Zappos, mentor me over the last decade or so. And he was talking about his first iteration of Zappos and how terrible it was. But he's like, let's just get it out there and get that feedback loop going. But this is helpful to know. Okay, so there's a person who is in charge of making that decision on who and how it gets tested, beta tested. So is what's the thought process behind the 2 weeks? And then also it's 2 to 4, right? And it sounds like the methodology might change a little bit pending the goal or system, but 2 weeks. So how did you come up with that?
Well, the very first sprint was actually a month. So we've already said it's maximum 4 weeks. Okay. But we found over time that shorter and shorter sprints are more effective. So my company does 1 week sprints for everything.
1 week.
On the average, probably in the industry average today, 2 weeks is the average, but that's not the fastest way to do it. Shorter sprints are better. And the reason is, for example, I got a call from a big consultancy. They called me up and they said, Jeff, we just did our first big agile project. It took us 6 months. We did 1 month sprints. We had a clear plan and goal with the customer. And at the end of 6 months, we delivered to the customer, and the customer said, it doesn't really meet our objectives. It's not what we want, or we're not going to pay for it. So they said, Jeff, what did we do wrong? And I said, well, did you meet with the customer at the end of every sprint and show them what you had? And they said, no. So this is probably the primary cause of failure of business in general. We're not working closely with whoever is going to use what we're creating to make sure there's a good fit while we're building it.
So, I just love this stuff so much. It's like, it makes me so happy. It's like candy. Because I mean, how many of us want to work smarter, not necessarily harder, right? And time is everything. But at the same time, as I think about your process and how many times have we plan something out and it takes 3 times longer than we thought and it costs 3 times as much, right? Whether it's personal or professional, you're building a house or you've got a product launch. And this, when you went back and we go back to that bank example and the word late, like it just stings, right? Because we've all been there. And what would you say was the number one reason why they were always late?
Okay, because fundamentally, the model for project management was wrong.
Okay. It's a system and the model. Okay.
Let me explain how we know that today. When we started to formalize Scrum, we talked to the 2 leading process engineers in the chemical industry. One of our colleagues said, you should go down to DuPont, talk to these chemical process engineers. They're the best in the world. And if you're going to do any kind of process, even if it's in software, you should talk to them. So we go down there, we explain, okay, here's how we do projects. We build these Gantt charts and stuff like that. And they said, well, how much variability is there in what you're building as you're building it?
Okay. Variability. Mm-hmm.
And we said, well, that process, that Gantt chart process is what we call a predictive process. And it's only useful when the variability in requirements is like 4% during the build process. So how much change is there during the build process? We said, over 50%. And they started laughing. And they said,
chart's not going to work.
Our chemical plants blow up.
That's not okay.
Because you apply a predictive process to a system that has high variability. So they told us, you go back to that software industry and you completely change what they're doing to an empirical process. And they gave us their book, chapter 12 or something like that. And that's one is where you're constantly inspecting and adapting every step of the way, because in a chemical plant, I remember one of my customers used to be Rhone Poulenc in France, and they built nerve gas. And they told me when they were building nerve gas, they used the same ingredients as you use to make vanilla to bake a cake, except that the temperature is different at certain times. And they had problems with nerve gas leaking out of the plant and killing all of the sheep in the area more than once. And so they said, okay, if you're going to have a chemical process that has variability that's going to cause vanilla instead of nerve gas instead of vanilla, you better be watching that vat every second, right? And you better be changing what you're doing based on the data you're receiving from the vat. So anything with high variability, and of course, in a startup, everything is like totally variable.
Yeah, the
and,
water, everything.
And product development, everything is, constantly changing. You need an empirical process control mechanism to make sure things are going to work and that they're delivered in a reasonable time.
It makes sense that those high stake situations, life or death, you go to those and you start to get real quickly on what a good model, which takes me back to thinking about you and in West Point and just, learning a little bit about when you started to truly become passionate about this way of thinking, I guess I would say. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you share the story about being, I think you were 8 years old and and just this transformative moment?
Well, sometimes I read it. I was looking in an encyclopedia when I was 8, and it had a picture of cadets marching on the parade field at West Point. And I turned to my mother and I said, I'm going to go to school there. I just knew. Don't ask me how I knew, but I knew. And of course, they laughed at me. They thought I was crazy. But sure enough, I wind up there. Now, when you enter West Point, you start in what they call Beast Barracks. It's kind of like Marine boot camp training. You walk in, the first thing they do is they shave your head, and then they, give you your gear. And then they sent me to the gym for a medical inspection. So I'm in a line with my duffel bag, with my head shaved, with all the other cadets. And next to me in the gym, I could see the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team was working out because the coach at West Point was the coach of the Olympic team. And so as I'm standing there for half an hour waiting, I'm looking at these like superhuman feats. And so after Beast Barracks, as we got into the normal year, we had to go out for sports. I said, I want to be a gymnast. And so on the gym team, our coach was the Olympic coach, and all his assistant coaches were members of the Olympic team. So for years, every day, at least 3 hours a day, sometimes even through the weekends, I'm trained by an Olympic coach. And the rigor of that training, no matter how good you are never good enough. Every time you do it, the next time you're going to do better. Continuous improvement was kind of baked into my head. So that later when I come across a company like Toyota, which is based on continuous improvement, it's obvious, right? In my last year when I was there, they put me in charge of the cadets marching on the parade field for my company. And my company was actually the worst company in the Corps of Cadets. For 100 years, they've been known as the Loose Stews because of their sloppy, mediocre performance. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get them to march better until on the company bulletin board, I put in color-coded notes, like sticky notes on a wall, in priority order, the things they needed to do to get better. And then without saying anything, after every parade, they'd walk by those color-coded notes, and the next parade they would do better.
And were these specific, tangible things to them in that?
Exactly.
It wasn't highlight. It was like
Like,
Okay.
okay, like,
I'm like, what was on the sticky notes? You got to tell me, Jeff.
yeah, like Charlie stuck his sword in the dirt in the middle of the parade field and we lost 5 points. Okay.
So
Next,
don't do
fix
that.
that.
Sticky note number 1.
So
Okay.
within 3 months, they became the best marching company at West Point. And as a result, they were selected, our most famous graduate died around that time, and they were selected to bury General MacArthur. When we graduated, my future father-in-law was watching the parade. And he says to me after the parade, you know, that second company from the last, which was my company, totally different than all the other companies. They literally floated across the field. They looked like they were floating. And I said, well, those are the guys that buried General MacArthur, and they are different. And they learned it by making work visible, which is a fundamental principle of Scrum. Yes. Sticky notes on a wall, prioritizing what needs to be done, and letting the team self-organize around, letting the team figure out themselves how to make those improvements to do really well.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. It's 2020 and there's never been a better time to own your voice, to show up and build your personal brand. People are done with the facades. They're ready for real. I'm incredibly excited to announce that enrollment is now open for my new course, Humanize to Monetize. This is a comprehensive course for building a personal brand that connects with your dream audience while converting into impact and income. I've built multiple 7-figure businesses, launched a New York Times bestselling book, and cultivated powerful brand partnerships all through my personal brand. And I'm ready to share my secrets with you on how I did just that. You'll learn the exact skills, strategies, and tools you need to build your personal brand online, how to make an impact and make money at the same time. I've never shared these proven, detailed, and actionable step-by-step methods in this capacity before. This content is 20 years in the making, and it has led my clients, my students, and myself generating millions and millions of dollars while staying in alignment and making an impact. I will personally be there along the route with you in the trenches as you take this course, and I'm excited to guide you. For more information, pricing, and to enroll, head to amyjomartin.com/H2M. That's amyjomartin.com/H2M. Let's talk about making work visible. With my first company, we had a big wall in the office that was like chalkboard, and we called it the blessin' wall. Lesson is a blessing, and it was like celebrate those mistakes and make sure everybody knows so they don't do what you just did type thing. Is that what you're talking about? Like the transparency of people learning from each other and the reality of kind of making public work, not necessarily forward-facing outside your own organization, but what do you mean by making work visible?
Well, first of all, you need to make work visible so that people know what to do and what the priority is.
Mm-hmm. So like we use Monday.com, for example.
Monday is a tool that will do that for you, right?
Absolutely.
That's really important. But the improvement cycle you're talking about in Scrum, we have 2 major mechanisms for that. One is a daily meeting where it's short, 15 minutes, but we want to know, it's kind of like a football huddle. Mm-hmm. Maybe the quarterback got sacked in the last play. What are we going to do in the next play so that the quarterback doesn't get sacked and we make some yardage, right? That's the meeting every day. And in that meeting, you may change the entire way of working. Sometimes the football team goes back, a different play is called, every single player moves into a different position. So making those adjustments every day is critical for the small changes. But then at the end of a sprint, we have a retrospective. It's a time where the team talks about bigger issues like what do we do well, not so well, what what are the changes that we could make that would make the whole team function better? And we want to prioritize those and take the top one, and we're going to implement that change in the next sprint. That's fundamental. It's baked into the Scrum process.
Okay. So these Scrum meetings, these huddles per se, I'm guessing mornings, you said about 15
It
minutes.
seems to work best in the morning. Yeah.
Okay. And having been in Silicon Valley before in startups and kind of being a part of that, a lot of times people are standing. They're not even sitting down if they're in
Right.
person.
Best done standing up. Yeah.
Standing. And then now that we're all virtual, Jeff, and people are in Zoom or they're in whatever platform of choice, any cues or tips on how to keep these quick meetings? It's just a different situation with a lot of people virtual now.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about Scrum is that, and it was surprising to me, and it took a lot of research over the years to actually prove this. Scrum can work just as well for 1,000 teams as for one team. So it really scales. And Scrum can work just as well with people in multiple locations as if they're in the same room.
Okay.
And now we're all in different locations.
Mm-hmm.
The problem in different locations is having people synchronized, which is easier than up close. So you have to do Scrum well when you're all on Zoom, and you can't be sloppy about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's important, if everybody's in the same building, that everybody's there and the meeting starts on time. Well, it's even more important that everybody dials into Zoom on time, right?
Time, yes. Okay.
And then the conversation has to be focused on, okay, there's multiple ways to approach this, but basically is, what did we get done yesterday and what are we going to get done today as a team? And what are the problems that are in our way and how do we going to overcome that need, and everybody needs to speak. Scrum is about everybody always participating. So in order to do that in 15 minutes, the team has to be small, and people have to be, concise. And anything that takes a longer discussion, we have what we call the parking lot. And after the 15-minute meeting, those people that want to talk about some longer questions that need to be discussed, only the people that need to talk needs to stay to talk about those.
Okay.
And that has become kind of the water cooler of Zoom, is this parking lot meeting after the daily Scrum, because the daily Scrum is very organized and constrained, but the parking lot is kind of open-ended.
I imagine just so many companies. I know I've interviewed some of the founders of companies who have almost been forced into this model because of the situation that everybody has landed in with being in a pandemic and everything being different. When you look at kind of how this methodology and just your mindset impact, and it applies to everyday life, just outside of business, because I imagine you start running this with your own personal world. What are some of the applications that you've seen either yourself or with other people where you're running these sprint, these quick, how does it work? Or even families, like what are some of the things that you've seen as case studies?
There's a book called Happy Families, where a New York Times editor came around. He interviewed a lot of Agile people, all of whom are doing Scrum with our families. The example that he put in the book about my family was our Thanksgiving dinner, which tended to be fairly large, about 30 people. And we broke it down into small teams, no more than 4 or 5 people on a team. And teams had different responsibilities. And I remember it was fascinating because the team that was the greeting team, the leader of that team was like about 5 years old.
I love
it. but he got everybody, amazingly organized and welcomed coming in. And then the team that set things up, the team that cooked the dinner, the team that, did the dishes, it all worked just unbelievably, amazingly well. Okay. So that's one way, but a lot of people will use it for their kids. Like my son uses it for my granddaughters. When they get up in the morning, what has to happen to get them off to school? Okay. They got to brush their teeth. They got to have their breakfast. They got to clean up their room a little bit. They got to get dressed. They got to make sure they have their books and their homework. It's all on sticky notes on a wall.
Love it.
Before that, he used to have to yell at them all the time, like, Have you done this? Have you done that? And now they can self-manage. That's one of the things about Scrum. It's all about self-managing, teams self-managing. And so it's great for kids.
Oh yeah. I can't wait. I've got a 15-month-old who we're ready for the sticky notes already. He had a handful the other day. He associates me with sticky notes because I have them literally right here. But so with that being said, like just kind of to turn the corner here, what's one lesson, Jeff, that you find yourself learning over and over?
Well, for your people who are, a lot of them are thinking about career changes and how to become more successful. A thing that always sticks in my mind that we use in Scrum training is this Venn diagram, where part of it is, okay, what is the value proposition? What can we sell that people are going to buy? You have to have some compelling vision for a product. And on the other side of that is, what can you and your team deliver? Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't matter how great the vision is, if you can't deliver, it's not going to work. And third, what can you really be passionate about? Mm-hmm. Because without passion, it's very hard to be successful, and it's almost impossible to be happy. So getting at the intersection of those three things, what is it? A lot of people that are trying to be successful, they tend to think it's all about them, but it's not about you. It's how you can actually help other people. And in the startup world, millions of them, right?
Right.
How can you help tremendously a large number of people? In order to do that, you need yourself. There are teams of one, but more often a larger team that can actually deliver that value. And if you are not fired up and passionate about it, it is never going to work.
Yeah.
So before you even do anything, figure out, okay, you in your heart, what do you really feel strongly about? What is going to propel you through all the difficult times that are going to be ahead?
Mm-hmm. Startup droughts. Yes. It's very similar. I always say it like similarly with the Venn diagram, where passion, purpose, and skill collide, bliss resides. There's kind of a sweet spot in that intersection.
The same thing. Yeah, that's the same thing.
And I've had purpose problems in the past where the passion's there and the skill, but then the passion starts to lose gas if you don't have that service. And I'm thinking of the value prop, the what can we deliver and the what are we passionate about. That's so smart. I was just speaking to the former head of education at Google, and he says, instead of saying, what do you want to do when you grow up, to kids, he says, what problem do you want to solve? Mm-hmm. And I just love that flip, because it's back to your value prop in that diagram again. So let's kind of go back for a second to what you had said earlier, like no matter how good you are, you're not there yet. That constant pushing the envelope. And you've worked with some incredible talent, some of the top innovators, and you are one yourself. What would you say is one consistent trait that you see among them? Or maybe a couple, just whatever comes to mind.
Well, I had, I work with a venture capital group. In fact, I just started an investment company in the last couple of months as a sideline to my Scrum company. And I was at a conference in Boston where we had a bunch of VCs on a panel, and they were asked, what do you think about lean startup? Mm-hmm. They said, we don't invest in lean startup. And everybody was kind of shocked. They said, well, why is that? They said, because we only make money when we have some brilliant person that is so passionate. They have like this goal, it's like they're taking a boat to the other side of the ocean. They know they're going to land there, and they will never give up. And the only time they change direction is when they have to pivot. They might have to change direction to move with the wind. But as soon as they can get right back on track, they're back on track. They said, that's where we make all our money.
Interesting. How do you feel about that?
I think that's absolutely true.
Oh, it reminds me of when with my first company, I had a couple of investors, and one of which was actually Tony Hsieh. And he said, you've got a wave, you got a surfboard, and you have a surfer, right? The surfer is the entrepreneur, the founder, the surfboard's the product, and hopefully there's a wave or trend that's like pushing you forward. And it was very similar. He's like, I 100% am betting on the surfer because 99% of the time it's all going to change anyway or shift, like you said. So that's so fascinating for people listening. That's what they're looking for. This is where interesting.
So everything is going to change, but there needs to be some vision that's driving you through all that change in order to connect with.
So vision and passion. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And is there a specific area that you're interested in investing in, like in terms of vertical?
I was very fortunate that I bought one of the first Tesla Roadsters, and that enabled to get me friends and family stock at $17.
Nice.
And so that has turned out extremely well. And I did it because everybody told me I was crazy, but I was passionate about, we need to electrify the cars. We need to do it in a way that it's fun. I already had solar on my roof. I already had more electricity than I could use. So, gas was going to be free. But I never imagined that would turn out to be the best investment in my portfolio that I'd ever made. Okay.
Amazing.
And a similar thing happened with Bitcoin. In the early days of Bitcoin, I said, the future needs to be freedom from the banks. I mean, people need to be able to exchange value without somebody ripping off a piece of their pie every time they turn around. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin just seemed like the right thing. And I had actually been CEO of a digital cash startup. So I knew something about that domain and the many failures in that domain that happened before Bitcoin hit the scene. And so that's turned out very well. And also I started working with a venture firm, OpenView Venture Partners, in 2006. And their goal was to implement Scrum everywhere in the venture group, to run everything in every company they invested in. Their goal was to double the return on investment compared to other VC groups. And they have been incredibly successful, particularly in the last round. One of their investments, Datadog, they got a 53,000% return. So with things like this going on, I need to invest in my primary company, Scrum Inc. But I've had another healthcare startup that I founded some years ago that has been kind of incubating in the background. And it's time for me to put more investment in that and start to actually probably start hiring people, expand that out. Changing healthcare is a more difficult problem than disrupting software development, right? Mm-hmm. So I've had to wait a few years and really think about this and have a build up a big wallet to deal with the challenges that are in healthcare, the things that resist change. But also I'm investing back in OpenView because they just did a new round. They were so successful in this is like their sixth round. They were so successful in the last round. The new round is twice what everybody just wanted to pile in. So most of my time is spent with Scrum Inc. and with Scrum, but now coming into next year, I need to spend a day or two a week figuring out what to do with Tesla investment holdings.
There you go. That's a good problem to have. I'll be part of your team if you need a 4 or 5 member huddle in the morning.
Yeah.
And so where do you're clearly able to spot areas of innovation really early. And some of that's just got to be an intuitive, just the way your brain works. But where do you get your news? Where do you seek information, or what's your setup look like?
I'm constantly, it's funny. I'm constantly scanning the internet, but I'm always looking for the outliers. The standard news, to me, that's all made up. Okay. Where's the canary in the coal mine that's squawking?
So do you just dive deeper into rabbit holes?
I'm always looking at that. And it may seem crazy.
It's worked out pretty well, I'd say. Do you have Twitter lists where you follow certain people?
I follow certain things on Twitter.
Yep.
I follow both the conservatives, the liberals. I want to see the clash of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see what's evolving. And also, this is another strategy I've always taken with in terms of investing. Everybody has their own strategy, but I've always put a little, something is interesting, I'm going to put a little money in it and see what happens.
Okay.
So I've run dozens.
Meaning like a personal like a direct investment into it, or do you mean in the stock market?
I used to do stuff in the stock market, particularly during the internet boom.
Mm-hmm.
But in more recent years, I pretty much stayed. This guy Jarvison was on the board of Tesla and SpaceX, and it's very interesting hearing him talk. He said one of the reasons I've been most successful is every stock I bought, I never sold any ever.
Held on, writing it out long term.
So, in my mind, if you're going to invest in stock, you want to be something that you're passionate about. It's really long term, and you're convinced that that is the future, and you're going to go through the ups and downs. But in more recent years, I've gone away from the stock market. What are different ways that you can invest in different domains? A little bit of money. Let's try this out. Let's try a little bit out of real estate. There's a dozen different ways you can invest in real estate. Let's put a little money into startup companies. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's just more ways to invest than you can think of. So the ones that just really ring a bell, throw a little money at it and watch it. And most of them will not be that successful. You're going to have to turn them off.
Especially if you're angel investing, right? But
this is like the venture capitalist approach to the world, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, to a lot of, not just venture capitalists, but most book publishers don't expect they expect one or two a year to actually be a home run. But I think that's interesting. Having started investing myself over the last 5-7 years, I'm trying to kind of look where I can add value as well for my skill set, as well as putting some money down, of course. But I think it helps you to feel a part of the process, a part of the even more skin in the game if you're not only putting money in, but also a little bit of time and injecting some value. Because otherwise, money is around. It's where can we actually get the thought power?
Right.
So that's interesting. And so, and as we kind of are winding up here, what's one thing you read recently that you would recommend that you've just found interesting? It could be an article, it could be a book, just anything.
I just picked up one of Nonaka's, Professor Nonaka wrote the New Product Development Game. He's written a number of books, and I picked up one of his recently that I hadn't looked at in a while. The book is all about the impact that Confucius had on China, the way of thinking. He used that to dive into talking about the ways companies are formed, the way teams are formed, the values and the ethics behind that. And that was, again, I'm constantly enlightened by Professor Nonaka, because his partner Takeuchi says he's the spiritual guide of their partnership. He's viewed as a national treasure in Japan. The equivalent of the Wall Street Journal in Japan did a whole month. Every day they did a long article on Nonaka's past and his history and why his contribution to global thinking, but also to Japan, has been so important. So he's always thinking about how can you not only build great companies, but build great people. And his last book is called The Wise Company, and it's all about wise leadership. And wise leadership means you're not only good at investing, leading, but there's some ethical base from which you come that causes you to create something that is good. That's what he's all about. Where does that, because if it doesn't have that right feeling to it, and also when I'm training CEOs, I say, okay, what are your priorities for the company? And they're all about, okay, we got to increase sales. We got to, increase margins. We got to do this. We got to do that. I said, well, that's not the way you think at Toyota. At Toyota, they think first, okay, how are we going to make the world a better place, the world that we around us? And then the next thing is, how do we make the lives of our employees better? And then the third thing is, how do we make our customers really happy? And if we do that in the right order, then all the financials will take care of themselves. And I remember one CEO of a company that he had kind of a Google Docs application for business. He says, if I do that, I have to totally change. I need to get off this profit and loss thinking. And I need to say, okay, how does my product change the life of a business to make the world a better place? My whole marketing strategy has to totally change.
Did you say yes? Yes, it
yeah,
does.
Next, let's look at your company has all these bare walls. It's boring. Have you ever been to Google? You should visit Google and walk around. And you need to create an environment that is much better for your employees. And if you can do those first two things, then your customers will start being a lot happier than they are today. And then the finance will follow. Yeah. So it really is a very different way of thinking. And I think your listeners need to understand this. For many of them, it's different than what they're thinking today. It's not about them.
Absolutely. It's, I think of Simon Sinek, who's a friend, and he's been on the show, and his recent book as well. The concept is very similar, where that focus is. And, I come back to the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Who are you? Not necessarily the what. The what will happen when those first two, the why and who, are in alignment. So final question here for you, Jeff. If we were to go back to a version of your younger self, let's say right before you're walking into West Point for the first time, what advice would you give to yourself at that point in your life if you could go back now?
Well, I think as a teenager, just going into college, you're so totally confused, and
you can pick 5 years later if you want. Maybe that's I wouldn't listen to anything.
Being open and willing to try something new. Be looking for something that is better, something that is greater, something that inspires you.
That is big right there.
That's what I felt standing in line at West Point at the gym watching those Olympic. They were inspiring. I was inspired. And I said, I want to be like them. So even though I obviously thought it's totally impossible, I just went there anyway. I just went and signed up.
And then did you start a champion ski team or something too?
Well, in my last year, I was really annoyed because in order to get a big A letter on the gym team, you had to be number 1 or 2, and I was number 3. But I knew I could get a letter on my jacket if I had a championship team, and I was a pretty good skier.
There you go.
Okay, we're going to go out.
That's awesome.
Build the team, and that team was really funny. And in some ways, again, it was an example of a Scrum in motion, because I remember one day we came back down from the slope and sitting around, and I was asking people, well, how did you do today? And we went around the group, it was just like a daily meeting, and no one had fallen down. And I said to them, if at least one of you two don't fall down every day, we are going to be losers.
We're not going to get better.
You guys want to be losers for the rest of your life?
Playing it safe. Yes. I know that. I'm a big snowboarder now, but I must not have tried very hard today. I didn't fall.
So yeah, you got to improve every day, right? No matter where you are to really be successful. Yeah.
Yes. How funny. Oh gosh. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jeff. You've inspired my team and I, and so many others. And it's just an honor to spend this time with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your time, your energy. And we'll make sure we follow along to see what you're up to next. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins, and of course a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time, and until then, why not now?